Good afternoon, COM 610B. This is Ben Frazier, wanting to go over week 6 questions with you. Most of you are doing very, very well. Unless you've heard from me, I'm very pleased with what you're doing. This week, instead of going over every question and pointing out the ones that are doing the best or ones that need corrected, I'm going to do a little bit of that. But mainly, I just want to reflect on the questions that are there and give some supplemental interest or actually my thoughts on some of this material that we covered. So that's the strategy, and I'll try to do that within a very brief period of time. First question is, what did you learn from the reading? Well, that's kind of like throwing up a softball for you and letting any of you discuss that sort of thing. But I really enjoyed the discussion, and many of you took this in a very interesting way. Yara started us off and talked about the importance and the power of film, and I totally agree with her on that. I think she's right on target. But I also say that television is very important. It allows us to develop characters over a longer period of time. And we're seeing today in some of television, not all, but some of television series, a really interesting characters that are being developed. And so I would say both film and television are very influential today. Wesley talked about celebrity influence, and of course that sometimes is tied in with film and television. Mary later talked about celebrity as well, and both of those comments were worth mentioning and worth thinking about. Richard made an interesting comment when he talked about the environment, and his reference there was Dances with Wolves. I think in the environment itself in which the film is framed and understood and is so very important. And writers who write in that way that give you the sense of place and of time are so important. Cormac McCartney, one of my favorite writers, very difficult writer, had a Catholic background. Don't know if he's a believer right now. Probably doubt it. But he did, Coen Brothers did one of his films, and that was No Country for Old Men, and it's just beautifully shot. Very violent, very powerful film, but the environment there was really important. You get other films like Paris, Texas, a very meditative film, and others like that. So environment does become very important. I think Richard is right. Johnston claimed that dramatic films increasingly are displacing organized churches as the place people go to gain greater understanding of who they are, who God is, and other profound questions in their lives. And I think it sounds, oh, how could that be? But it really is true. In many cases, you'll see people go to film, television, even YouTube and places like that to begin to address the questions. Now, they don't go into it thinking that's what's going to happen, but what they take out of it is that. I had one dramatic illustration of that when I was on a plane flew into Bombay, which is called Mumbai now, and I was flying from there over to Hyderabad to do some consulting. And on the trip, I was sat next to a man from the United States who was going back. And I said, "Oh, where are you going?" He says, "Well, I'm going home." And I said, "Oh, you're from here?" And he said, "Yeah, but I don't live here anymore. I live in the States." Well, I said, "Well, how did you end up, somebody from Hyderabad, moving to the States?" And he said, "Do you remember the film Animal House?" And of course I did. It was of my generation. Probably some of you are too young to remember that. But it's a very funny film with John Belushi, and it was a fraternity kind of film. It was basically a party and wild stuff, and I wouldn't recommend watching it, but some of you probably have, and it is a very funny film. And he said, "I saw that film, and it changed my life." He said, "Ever since I saw that film, I wanted to live in the States. I did everything I could. I got absolutely good grades, did everything I could. And so when I got ready to go to college, I was able to apply and go there and did very well, got a scholarship. And then I did so well in college, I got a good job. And now I'm living in the States. And I come home once in a while to see my family and that sort of thing." And so here's this film that had no intention of taking people out of one culture and bringing them over to another, or from India to the United States. And yet it had those effects. So film at time can have profound effects. And so I think that is absolutely right. Now, the second question, is the church currently using to full potential entertainment, education, and promoting spiritual change? And here, many of you said, well, it is, but probably not to its full potential. And then some of you said, but it's doing better than it has in the past. And my comment to that is it may be doing a little bit better in terms of the production value, and that sort of thing. But actually, I think the stories that we're creating in literature and in film and in television that represent it all with Christian characters, truly Christian characters, we're not doing a very good job at. And there's an interesting article that was in the New York Times in December 23rd, 2012. You could look it up if you want to. It's written by Paul Elie, E-L-I-E. And its title was, Has Fiction Lost Its Faith? Now, Paul Elie is one of my favorite authors. He's written a really good book on Catholic writers. And a lot of my writers, I'm Protestant, but a lot of my writers, favorite writers are Catholic, like Flannery O'Connor and Walker Percy and others like that. And he said, in short, how is Christian belief figuring into literary fiction in our place and time? And he says, it is something between a dead language and a hangover. He said, forgive me, he says, for exaggerating. He says, but if any patch of our culture is said to be post-Christian, it is literature. He says, half a century after Flannery O'Connor, Walker Percy, Reynold Price, John Updike presented themselves as novelists, what Flannery O'Connor calls with Christian convictions, he says their successors on the ground are very thin. And I think that's probably true. I do find that. He said the reason when people ask him what to do, he usually demurs. He doesn't try to answer that question directly. He does say, well, Matthew Arnold says we're a critical age, not a creative age, and all those kinds of things. He says, but where has the novel of belief gone? And he says the obvious answer, it has gone where belief itself has gone. In America today, Christianity is highly visible in its public life, but is marginal or of no consequence in a great many individuals' lives. Now, what a powerful statement that is, that there is still what Flannery O'Connor calls a Christ haunting. In other words, we're familiar with Christianity, we're familiar with the rituals and some of the thoughts of Christianity, but it's in a public way. But when it comes right down to how we make our decisions and how we live our everyday lives, it does not have as great an influence as the New Testament would want it to. He says also we're living in a time when it is possible to to speak of Christianity is a matter-of-fact way as one religion among many. So there are many more options. Now, this is a profound change in our country and in many countries. By the way, what has happened here has happened even in a greater way in Europe. So he says that this has brought us as Christians into a new environment about how we speak and how we talk about transcendent things and about God and particularly about Christianity. Now, let me quickly say he does not mean that people are not interested in religion or in the transcendent or in the supernatural. Both film, television, and books are full of those kinds of stories. But as far as true Christian stories in the line of Flannery O'Connor or Walker Percy or some of these other people, they're not really easily to be found. And Lewis could be thrown in there, and Tolkien, and several others like that. He says, Flannery O'Connor framed the struggle to make belief believable. And that's an important part. Make belief believable. Not just advertise it out there. Not just say, hey, you want to have fun, or you want to be good, or you want to be fulfilled, you can be a Christian. What happens when we make these things too simplistic or the answers too easy, people see them as unreal. And if you want to speak to the Christian, well, then that's one thing. You can say it that directly and that offhand. But if you want to speak to the non-Christian who has heard about Christianity, then you have to make it believable. You have to make it real. Remember, they know Christians. They have friends who are Christians. They see them struggle with life issues. And so she said, she insists, Flannery O'Connor insists, that Christian faith is a dimension added, not something taken away. Not, I won't do that. It's what God has done in us, and we can show us how to do that. Now, she does it in very covert ways, in very veiled ways. And it takes a lot of thought and concentration to really understand the purpose of her stories. But she said every one of her stories is an offer of faith. And the same with the other writers that I was talking about. Amos Wilder, years ago, said the re-education of the emotion is no doubt more difficult than the re-education of reason, if the two can be separated. He says the re-education of the imagination is even more difficult. And I think too often we just simply look for arguments and reason, and we don't speak to the emotion and the imagination, and that's what the entertainment education process can allow us to do. And I really think we need to spend more time figuring out how to do that. We need to have more artists who are Christian, writing about all kinds of things, not Christian artists, as some people would suggest. Okay, I'm running out of time, but just let me say, why is entertainment education a lifelong learning opportunity for all people? Because change is difficult. It takes a long time. It is profound. And so it takes a while. And I thought your discussion on there was good. Why is there a merger between news and entertainment in the United States? I think the interesting thing there is nobody doubts that there's that merger between the two. The question is why? Well, because news is sometimes hard to accept. News is usually negative. And we live in a visual culture. We want things to be exciting. We want attention. And so the entertainment has just sort of taken over the news industry. All right. I know I've just briefly went over those last two, but my time is up. Hope you have a good week. I hope that is useful to you. I will talk next week a little bit about why I think the films that are Christian are doing so poorly, and the stories. Okay. Bye-bye.